In the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, on a wall measuring approximately 15 feet by 29 feet,
a 29-foot wall in Milan survived a bomb that flattened the building around it. It survived Napoleon's soldiers, using the room as a stable. It survived 400 years of restorers fixing, a masterpiece, until almost none of the original paint was left. And now, for the first time, the tools that scientists use to X-ray the Mona Lisa are being pointed at this wall too. What they're finding isn't a secret code. It's something more interesting than that. A 500-year-old ghost of the painting Leonardo actually made, buried under the painting everyone thinks they've seen. Stay with me, because the real story here is stranger and more grounded than any conspiracy video will tell you. In the old refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, there's a wall roughly 15 feet high and 29 feet wide. Leonardo da Vinci painted on it between 1495 and 1498 at the invitation of Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan. Sforza was a ruler who understood that art was power. He had already turned the convent's church into a planned mausoleum for his family, and he wanted the monks who ate their daily meals in that refectory to look up from their bread and see Christ's final meal staring back at them. It was theology, politics, and personal legacy rolled into a single commission. Leonardo took the job and did something almost nobody expected. He refused to paint a fresco. Fresco was the standard technique for a wall this size, and for good reason. You mix pigment with water and apply it to wet plaster, and as the plaster dries, a chemical reaction locks the color into the wall permanently. The catch is speed. You have to finish each section before the plaster sets, usually within a single day, which means no second-guessing, no long pauses to think, no returning tomorrow to fix what you did today. That was never going to work for Leonardo. Contemporaries describe him standing in front of a painting for hours, sometimes an entire day, without lifting a brush, just looking, thinking, revising the composition in his head. So instead of fresco, he improvised a technique historians now call tempera grassa, layering tempera and oil paint onto plaster that had already dried. It gave him the freedom to work the way his mind actually worked. It also meant the paint was never chemically bonded to the wall. It just sat there, exposed to humidity, temperature swings, and the slow breakdown of organic binders. The consequences showed up almost immediately. Within about 20 years, visitors were already commenting on flaking and fading. By 1556, the biographer Giorgio Vasari described the painting as a muddle of blots. That kicked off 5 centuries of increasingly desperate restoration attempts, retouching, varnishing, and in some cases full overpainting, where restorers didn't preserve what Leonardo left, but repainted whole sections based on what they assumed he must have intended. Each attempt added a new layer between us and the original. By the 20th century, conservators estimated that somewhere around 80% of what visitors were looking at wasn't Leonardo's paint at all. It was 500 years of other people's guesses stacked on top of it. Then came August of 1943. Allied bombers hit Milan during the war, and the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie took a direct strike. The roof was torn off. Walls came down. The building was reduced to rubble around a single surviving structure, the north wall, protected by sandbags and scaffolding that had been hastily put up in anticipation of exactly this kind of attack. When the smoke cleared, that wall was still standing, the Last Supper more or less intact behind its barrier, while the rest of the refectory lay in ruins around it. The photographs of that scene became one of the enduring images of the Italian campaign, an accidental monument to how close the painting came to simply not existing anymore. But surviving the bombing didn't mean the painting had been saved from itself. What was hanging on that wall in 1943 was still mostly 5 centuries of overpainting, not Leonardo's brushwork. That's where Pinin Brambilla Barcelon comes in. And if this story has an actual hero, it's her, not an algorithm. Brambilla was an Italian conservator with decades of experience in Renaissance painting, and in 1978, she began what would become the longest single restoration project in the history of art conservation. Working with cotton swabs, solvents, and magnification, she spent 21 years removing centuries of overpainting one small section at a time, documenting everything as she went. She finished in 1999. What she uncovered mattered enormously, and it's genuinely underreported outside specialist circles. She confirmed that only a small fraction of Leonardo's original pigment had survived. Later estimates put it around 20%, and that the colors, expressions, and fine details underneath the overpainting were often meaningfully different from what generations of viewers had assumed was the Last Supper. She and the art historian Pietro Morani published their findings in 2001 in a book simply called Leonardo, The Last Supper, which remains the definitive technical record of what's actually on that wall. This is the real headline, and it doesn't need embellishing. For 500 years, most people who thought they'd seen Leonardo's Last Supper had actually been looking at an accumulation of other artists' repairs. Brambilla peeled that back and showed the world something closer to the original. That alone is one of the great conservation stories of the 20th century. It's also, unfortunately, the jumping-off point for a very different kind of story, one built less on documented restoration science and more on pattern finding, and it's worth walking through carefully, because the difference between the two matters. In 2007, an Italian musician and technician named Giovanni Maria Palla published a book called La Musica Celata, The Hidden Music. Palla argued that if you read the positions of the apostles' hands and the loaves of bread on the table as notes placed on a musical staff, moving right to left the way Leonardo wrote his mirrored notebook script, you get a 40-second musical phrase. Palla described it as sounding like a somber, hymn-like composition, and released recordings of it being performed. It's a genuinely creative idea, and Palla clearly did real work, building the mapping between image and notation. But it hasn't held up under scrutiny from musicologists or art historians, for a pretty simple reason. With a composition that has this many hands, this many loaves, and this much freedom in how you choose to draw staff lines across it, you can generate many different melodies, depending on the choices you make about spacing, key, and reading direction. That doesn't make it a hoax. It makes it what researchers call an underdetermined pattern, where the method has enough flexibility built in that it will find something almost regardless of the input. That's a very different claim than Leonardo hit a song in the painting. And it's worth being honest about that difference. That same year, an Italian technician named Slavisa Pesci tried something else. He took a digital scan of the painting, flipped a copy of it horizontally, and layered the mirrored version over the original at partial transparency. In the resulting composite, some viewers reported seeing shapes that aren't obviously present in the painting on its own. A figure suggested near the table's edge, something cup-like appearing near Christ's hands, a face-like pattern in the architecture above. Pesci's overlay is a real, reproducible image processing technique, and you can try it yourself with any photo. But overlaying a complex image with its own mirror image reliably produces new shapes almost anywhere you look, because faces, vessels, and outlines are things human vision is extremely good at inventing out of overlapping lines and shadows. This is a well-studied phenomenon called pareidolia, the same mechanism behind seeing a face in a wood grain or a cloud. Mainstream art historians pointed this out at the time, and it's a reasonable, evidence-based objection, not institutional stonewalling. The technique doesn't distinguish, Leonardo hid this on purpose, from any sufficiently detailed image produces ghost shapes when mirrored and blended. Nobody has shown a way to tell those two explanations apart, which is exactly why the finding didn't go anywhere in serious scholarship. In 2010, a researcher named Sabrina Galizia, who had worked at the Vatican Library, proposed a third layer, that the 12 apostles map onto the 12 signs of the zodiac, turning the composition into a hidden astrological calendar. Like the other two theories, it was covered in Italian media and drew some public interest. Like the other two, it has not been accepted by art historians who specialize in Leonardo, largely because the correspondences require a fairly generous amount of interpretive latitude to make the mapping work, and no independent researcher has been able to reproduce the claimed statistical significance behind it. Here's the part worth sitting with for a second, because it's the honest version of the "why does nobody talk about this" question. It's absolutely true that Leonardo was an obsessive encoder of information. His notebooks are famously written in mirror script, right to left, legible only when held up to a mirror, and scholars still debate whether that was primarily a practical accommodation for a left-handed writer or a habit of guarding his ideas from casual eyes, or some mix of both. It's also true that he built mathematical proportion and deliberate geometry into his compositions. Art historians like Martin Kemp and Carlo Pedretti have written extensively about how Leonardo's scientific and artistic thinking were the same thinking, just pointed in different directions. The vanishing point of the Last Supper really does converge precisely at Christ's temple. That's documented, measurable, and deliberate. Leonardo absolutely built layered meaning into his work. None of that, though, is the same as evidence that he hid a specific psalm, a specific hidden figure, or a zodiac calendar inside this particular painting. Those are three separate, unverified claims, made by three researchers working independently, using three different methods, none of which has been replicated or confirmed by peer-reviewed art historical or scientific analysis. When historians say, "This hasn't been demonstrated," that's not the same as institutions actively suppressing inconvenient evidence. It's the ordinary, unglamorous outcome of a claim not surviving scrutiny. Extraordinary claims about a 500-year-old wall don't get dismissed because museums are afraid of what they'll find. They get set aside because you can find a pattern if you allow yourself enough freedom to define the pattern, is one of the oldest and best documented failure modes in all of pattern recognition, whether the person doing the recognizing is a human being with a theory or, these days, a machine. Which brings us to what AI can actually do here, and, just as importantly, what it hasn't done yet. Multispectral and infrared imaging is real, well-established conservation science. It works by photographing a painting under multiple wavelengths of light, visible, infrared, ultraviolet, and X-ray, because different wavelengths penetrate to different depths of the paint and plaster. Some capture only the surface. Others reveal the underdrawing the artist sketched before painting. Others can reveal pentimenti, the regrets, where an artist changed their mind and painted over an earlier version of a figure or object. This technology has produced genuinely striking results elsewhere. In 2015, the researcher Pascal Cott and the company Lumiere Technology published a multispectral analysis of the Mona Lisa that revealed multiple earlier compositional stages beneath the surface. Clear evidence that Leonardo reworked the portrait substantially over time. Major institutions, including the Louvre, the National Gallery in London, and the Vatican Museums, now use this kind of imaging routinely as part of conservation and scholarly research. Machine learning adds a genuinely useful layer on top of that raw imaging data. AI-driven computer vision can register and align dozens of overlapping scans far more precisely than a human working by eye, can flag subtle regularities in line spacing or color transition that would take a specialist weeks to notice manually, and can help conservators separate what's original pigment from what's later restoration material, based on how each layer responds across different wavelengths. That's not hype. It's an active, useful research area, and it's a big part of why we understand paintings like the Mona Lisa better today than we did 20 years ago. Here's the honest, unglamorous truth about the Last Supper specifically. Though, a comprehensive, publicly documented, AI-assisted multispectral survey of the kind that was done on the Mona Lisa has not been completed and published for Leonardo's mural in Milan. Some partial infrared and technical imaging has been done as part of ordinary conservation work, and it has helped confirm details about Leonardo's underdrawing and working method. But there's no verified, peer-reviewed AI analysis that has confirmed the music, the mirrored figures, or the zodiac calendar that Paula, Pesci, and Galizia proposed. If and when a full modern imaging survey of the mural is carried out and published, it may well turn up new, real information about Leonardo's working process. That's exactly what happened with the Mona Lisa. But that's different from the claim that AI has already validated a hidden decoded message, and it's worth being precise about that difference rather than blurring it for the sake of a dramatic headline. So where does that leave us? Because there's a real, honest mystery here, even without inventing one. The Last Supper is a painting Leonardo built with obsessive mathematical precision, using a technique he knew was unstable, in service of a patron who wanted the room itself to feel like a permanent participation in the Last Supper. We know for certain that most of what generations of visitors saw before 1999 wasn't his brushwork at all. It was other artists' attempts to restore a deteriorating masterpiece, sometimes guided by good intentions, and sometimes by not very much information at all. We know Brumbilla's 21-year restoration uncovered real, documented differences between the surface everyone assumed they knew and the fragments of original paint that survived underneath. We also know that Leonardo was, without question, the kind of mind that built codes into things, mirror writing, mathematical proportion, layered scientific observation folded into artistic composition. That's not speculation, it's in his notebooks. What we don't know, and what nobody has actually demonstrated with rigorous, reproducible evidence, is whether he built a specific hidden song, a hidden figure, or a hidden zodiac into this particular wall. Those remain interesting, unverified, largely rejected hypotheses from independent researchers working outside mainstream art history, not suppressed truths waiting for the right technology to finally unlock them. If there's a genuine frontier here, it's this: a full modern multispectral and AI-assisted survey of the Last Supper, done at the same level of rigor as the Mona Lisa project, has never been completed and published. That's not because institutions are hiding something. It's an enormously expensive, technically difficult undertaking on a wall that is already fragile, already down to a fraction of its original pigment, and administered under Italian cultural heritage law with the kind of careful access restrictions that any 500-year-old, physically compromised national treasure would reasonably require. When conservation of the object itself is genuinely precarious, caution isn't evidence of a cover-up. It's the same caution that's kept the painting on that wall at all. The honest version of this story doesn't need a conspiracy to be compelling. A Renaissance genius built a painting so mathematically deliberate that its architecture still points, 5 centuries later, straight at a single point on Christ's face. That painting was betrayed almost immediately by the very technique that let Leonardo perfect it, spent 500 years buried under other people's guesses, survived a bombing raid by inches, and was finally, patiently, brought back closer to its original form by one conservator's 21 years of work with cotton swabs and solvents. Somewhere along the way, 3 independent researchers looked at what remained, and each thought they'd found a hidden message, a song, a phantom figure, a zodiac. Modern imaging and AI may someday tell us more about what's really underneath that surface, the way it already has for the Mona Lisa. But right now, the wall in Milan is still mostly telling us the story it's told for 500 years, that even the things we're certain we've fully seen are usually only the last layer of something much older, and much harder one, underneath.